Today is October 10th, 2019, and we are at the Community Media Center in Westminster, Maryland. I am Bill Palm, interviewing Ray Brown from Union Mills, Maryland. And Ray, I understand that you were in the Army a long time ago. Tell me, how did you end up in the Army?
Well, actually, the war broke out in Korea, of course, in the mid 1950s, and I waited it out, and I was drafted into the war at near the end of 50 and so forth. And from there, I traveled on to the, actually through Fort Meade.
Fort Meade?
I went through the induction area of Fort Meade, and from there I was processed and sent to Fort Belvoir, Virginia for combat engineer training.
Oh my, okay. And that was rugged.
It was a unique training for the type of soldier that was involved with, and it's like we remarked already that wasn't realized to me that actually the combat engineers at times could be in front of the infantry, even searching out for landmines, is which I actually did a short period of time over there doing that. But as we promoted along, I did finish training there at Fort Belvoir, and after graduating there, they put out a testing for those that had some skills in the civilian fields, and electrical was one of them, and I tested for it and passed well, and they sent me to a very fine electrical theory school, and that of all types of windings, magnetic windings, which was really quite nice, having had electrical background of residential and commercial wiring before I was put into service, of course. But I went through that, and upon graduation of that, we gathered there, and the cadre come out with the issue of orders that we were going to be processed to, and he noted that I was being sent to, they called it FECOM, which was Far East Command.
Okay.
And that was really to Korea. So
yeah.
if we want to progress from there, as we traveled on that, I did then go out. I traveled out, first time ever being on a flight, a civilian flight that flew a big old DC-4 across the states to Seattle, Washington, where I was processed at Fort Lawton. It was an old Army base that was used during World War II. And I did note about it that the barracks were made of, like, some portions of it was tar paper, and they absolutely told us there would be absolutely no smoking in those buildings, that they would burn down in minutes. And actually, I believed it. They were in a huge mess hall that you stood in line almost around the clock to get through it to get your meals. And if it was raining, you stood there with ponchos in the rain waiting to get through to get your meals.
And it did rain. What time of the year were you at?
Well, I was out there in early fall of 51, I guess you could say. And processing through there, I had a number of mishaps happen with me. I was traveling somewhat with some guys that I knew that had been in Fort Belvoir, but when they got ready to process us out of there, they said they had lost my medical records and the shots that I'd taken. I'd have to take my shots over. I said, "Oh, wait, do I want to take all them shots?" It was 13 or 14 shots. I had sore up arms from the existence of them. I said, "I have my shot record that they gave me today." He said, "Well, you might have marked that up." I said, "I didn't mark that up." I said, "That doesn't make sense." I said, rather than take them over, I'll wait. So they kept me another 3 days, and by that time, the guys I knew were going. And I was on a new concept to travel with all new personnel. And but being that, then we did ship out through Seattle, Washington, and I never forgot the experience of this, getting on this ship. It was called the Private Sadoa S. Munimore. It had been built in Baltimore, Maryland, and it was a converted victory ship. And they loaded the troops on it, and we started across the Pacific, and we got into apparent storms that you would not believe. That thing danced around like a canoe, I thought, and banged and carried on, and I thought to myself, and finally the commanding officer of the ship came on. He said, it seemed like several days we were out there and all. Like he said, that we have gone out so far, but we went backwards towards the state for 3 or more days because of the intensity of storms that was in front of us. and luckily, I didn't get sick, but I mean, about 90% of the guys got deathly sick on that, of all that intense bouncing around in that ship. But settling out that point, then we finally got our position where we moved on across Pacific and landed and went into Yokohama.
And you were a combat engineer.
Yeah. That's right.
And assigned to a combat engineer company?
Yeah, well, it was headed towards that. What happened...
but you actually did combat engineer stuff. You went out...
Yeah.
You were at Incheon?
I landed at Incheon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We processed through Japan, the old Camp Drake, which was there for World War II, that the soldiers went through there. And actually, it was kind of phenomenal. We went in there and they loaded the train with so many troops that it couldn't get up the grade. I never realized, but Japan's tracking of their trains is far less gauge. It's real narrow. It looks like a small train the size of our over here, but it was so overloaded apparently that they had to back it down and take it apart, and get it so we could get up into Camp Drake and go through our processing and out of there. And then they moved us around to go over and land at Incheon. And learning the things that was the process of this kind of thing, it was noted that the tide had to be just at the right time for these ships to be able to get up into Incheon. And it was like at 1 and 2 a.m. in the morning when these ships could get up in there with us. The troop ship we were on went up in there. As we went up in there, we went past, the ship was doing all this, putting off shells, and it was a battleship New Jersey.
Mercy.
We were that close to her, I thought I could have thrown a stone on it. It was amazing that we went up past it, and it settled in to be able to go ashore in the LSTs that they were providing there, and it's a new experience for a young man, never been involved with something like this. We're standing on the deck, and I did learn to know one man familiar, and we were chatting. His name was Duffy, and his cadre came on deck to call us to go over the side, and I thought, my name is Brown. I thought, well, I won't be first here anyhow. It'll be somebody here with A or B that'd be ahead of me, but I failed to recall that they had put numerical numbers and things on our helmets. And this cadre come up and he called out, the first man to go over the side would be 149A. And it really didn't register the first time, and I was kind of dumbfounded about it. But Duffy, the man who we're kind of facing it, he said, "Brownie, that's you." And I said, by that time he had to shout it out more loudly, and I responded to it, and he said, "Well, over the side and don't lose any of your equipment,"
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know what was down there. It looked like about 50 or so feet down them rope ladders and I got over the side and carefully got down. I hung tight with everything. I got into the LST. I didn't lose anything, but I witnessed guys, they dropped their helmets, they dropped their M1s, and portions of their backpacks and things. But with it all, we got ashore then, and I first served a short period of time. Like I spoke with the combat engineers, and but it wasn't long. And this one morning we were called out, and the cadre come on and said that 2 of us were to report to the commanding officer, myself, and there was another young man. He was a Japanese-born American, Ken Morioka. I never forgot this young man. He was very nice and very good at his skill in civilian life. He was in VHF training and transmissions of signals, radio signals, and I was in the electrical field. So we went to see this commanding officer, and he said, "Your records have caught up to you, young man." He said, "We could use you at a far better place. We're going to transfer you into the Signal Corps to work with the establishment of a new battalion, 8189th Signal Service Battalion, which was going to formulate, and we would go south." Well, that was one good configuration, because we went away from the lines where we had been up in them. We went back down, I think, as far as Taegu probably, and they formulated this company which had 4 individual companies in it. I got assigned to 556, and in retrospect, he and I both met with personnel that they could get to us that would be able to work these jobs on these mountain locations with these radio relay teams of transferring signals. And I taught the men how to work the power units and how to maintenance, and he was with radio tech, and a very fine radio tech. So it went pretty good setting up. I think we must have had 19 relays over. We had one even up in Panama John that we worked our way up. When we got to Seoul, in retrospect too, they said when we passed that battleship, and never forgot they made a remark about this, that it was shelling Seoul, which was 16 miles away from us to the east. And witnessing when we got to Seoul, it was really devastating. It was just flat, really extensive damage. And the retrospect of it was phenomenal. At the north side of Seoul, up in the mountainous area, there was a huge stone. It was a college, they said, that was built by the Japanese for the Koreans. And it had only a few external breaks of stone where some shelling had struck it, but bits stripped inside, they kind of ransacked it. I had to doctor around and try to doctor the wiring up enough to get it functional, which we did fair with that. And then we set up, that was the carrier base for this 8189 Signal Service Battalion. And it did, we got awarded, we got some astonished awards for the work that the battalion accomplished. And James Van Fleet came to see us, I think, one time, and he was there for us. So it was kind of a busy time. Time went pretty quickly, and so forth, and we were able to do well with it all. And it was a very good company. I had a very nice company commander, Captain Sullivan, and he said, "You boys were just a life sending to us." He said to find skilled people that come from the civilian to get to where you really could promote and do the work that the Army really needed. So in that respect, it was pretty good. It was pretty challenging sometimes around and what was involved with it all. But
yeah, so you were dealing with communications from the front lines all the way to wherever they needed to communicate.
It came from Pusan, which is the very south of the southern tip of South Korea. We were able to set up that communications could be forwarded up to the front lines, so to speak. And it was amazing how well it worked. It was quite an experience.
Okay, and this was all landline. This was all.
Well, this is VHF, all signal by air.
Okay.
It's all signal by aerials. Yeah,
Okay.
signal. VHF was all very high frequency, that would be called. And it, fundamentally, I mean, he was very good about getting the guys on corps that had enough experience to maneuver into doing the job that was responsible for them, and the guys that I taught to handle the power units, how to maintain them and care for them and do some general repair to them and so forth like that. Biggest thing, I can recall some astonishing things that the mountains could put a lot of problems against us to get things up in there, you know.
Yeah.
But they had a given amount of Koreans, they were fairly mid to older men that came, and they had a device that they called a chigi, and it had two pokes that went down to the ground and standards up with a fork out on the back of it, and they would lean over and they would put things on, rest things on it. And the amazing one was that when we trying to get gasoline up the mountains, we had it in 50-gallon drums. Now, a 50-gallon drum is pretty weighty.
Yeah, heavy.
But these old gentlemen would say that we get it centered, and he'd lean over, and then this thing would be poked on the ground, and we'd carefully put it down in this back of this chiggy, they called it, and he'd lean forward and walk right up that mountain with it. I mean, I tried one, and I'm telling you, it's all I could do to keep my balance. You know, they had something going for them there, and the way they could do that for us, and that was pretty intriguing to see that kind of thing. But those were the extent of things. I did get midway through there. They called it R&R. They would give you a little bit of a break from country involvement and send you to rest and recuperation
Yeah.
to Japan for about, I think it was about 11 or so days, something like that roughly. And
So what did you do on R&R?
well, the first two graders, I was a non-commissioned officer, sergeant first class, and they got to go to Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to see that in the mountainous areas, and I did some general touring that they had set up for us, knowingly that we would like to see while we were in that country. And I saw a fair amount of Yokohama also. Of course, that's pretty close down by, and it was quite an experience to see that country in general, which, you know, as a young man, you're never near anything like that, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, they did their best to treat us well. They had very fine foods and things. They had steaks and so on. We had really nice mess halls and so forth, and very nice care for us, and had places where the men could go and entertainment where they had music and dancing. They'd bring some of the Japanese girls there. Was, you know, adaptable to knowing the Americans and their continuity of how they would have for dancing and so forth. It was very nice. It was kind of a treat, and then they were back to Korea and so forth. So I stayed my stay there actually we had one winter of '51 was really terrible. That's when they lost a lot of troops up and around the Carroll County Reservoir. Mm-hmm. Because of the intensity of it. But it was so amazing to me to ascertain that the North Koreans that were associated with the Chinese come across with, mm-hmm. you know, I mean, quite huge numbers of troops, and just, you know, it was overpowering to, mm-hmm. we didn't have that, and MacArthur had backed up at one time, and his idea was, which was pretty unique, I guess, he went in at Incheon, which trying to trap those in between there and Busan coming from the other way, and mm-hmm. that's how he got a gain on things. In fact, as history recalls, when I read about it, he was headed for the Manchurian border, but then he was pulled out of there. Truman didn't want to incite, he thought it might incite a World War III, you know, yeah. So he didn't allow that, and he brought him back to the States, as I understand, and he was retired out. But I mean, basically, it just kind of held there at the 38th parallel. We would see him come there and meet. It was intriguing to me, being from the States. I would see the North Koreans come driving in, would you believe, in a 1948 Chrysler. And we're talking about 1951. Yeah. They're coming driving in a 48 four-door Chrysler, mm-hmm. Royal or Windsor Chrysler four-door sedan, nice. And of course, our troops were going in our staff cars were 50, 51 Chevrolets, you know. Yeah. And they went in this tent for a meeting. They weren't really in there all that long. I guess it didn't seem like it just kind of hung there. And Eisenhower, I guess he was the concept for getting the war, that it got stabilized and just at standard and didn't do any further push. Okay, so where was the meeting, and why were you there when they were meeting with the North Koreans? Well, we had a relay right there. We had a VHF relay right there. Okay. At Panmunjom, and as a result of that, it was really close to line. You could see activity, really. They still mm-hmm. put off some activity and things which wasn't too trustworthy. You know, I mean, mm-hmm. they had what got crazy old hill they called Pork Chop Hill, and some of them places which had a name on it was really bad. I think the Chinese and them, they lost a terrific amount of troops, though, so to speak, but they were really poorly clad. They weren't ready for any of that kind of weather. They had like cloth type clothing. It was mm-hmm. kind of like quilted clothing, as opposed to we had much more geared up, better clothing in that respect, and a lot of them really didn't survive due to the weather that was up against them. But it was an intense amount of force at that point, and it took some stabilization until they got that it just was at a point where it just hung at the 38th parallel, and there wasn't mm-hmm. anything of specifics. It's still a remarkable standard to think mm-hmm. of, you know. Mm-hmm. For a young man, I mean, I'm looking at all this, and you wonder sometimes what you were really into and so forth like that. But it was quite an experience. Yeah. I don't know that basically, overall, it was a really good. I got to see even, I got to go travel over to South Korea, a good portion of it, and so forth, and see how the people really lived in those houses that were pretty much like a cement case flooring, and they'd have like a tunnel underneath the flooring in there, and they would build a fire in there and more or less choke it down, and it just simmered along. And it was amazing how it heated the floor, and the rest of it was pretty just kind of material that almost looked like heavy cardboard. I don't know really what it was, but it would be enclosed by that, and they were living in those, trying to survive. Tremendous amount of the civilians got involved, and well, it was phenomenal to see. I took one guy out there one time, and he couldn't believe it, that there was those civilians that were having been struck during the war. It was just pile. It might have been 30 feet high, great, huge pile that they were processing through a center where they would burn them and so forth like that, for the.
Just really incredible casualties amongst the
Oh
civilians.
yeah, and it was that. Well, they didn't have much chance. The civilians, they didn't know which way to go, I guess, at some points, and it was
just caught in the middle.
Caught in the middle, absolutely. And that's war is kind of that was a nasty effect about it. But I mean, but we'd meet some that they worked for us there in the battalion and so forth, and they were really dedicated people. They would do the laundry work and help with the mess hall and stuff around the maintain the buildings, and I recall one time I was helping. They had authorized me as a non-commissioned officer to have 3 vehicles. I had a brand new GM, what they call the old Army deuce-staff,
Yes.
And it was
2.5-ton truck.
Oh, it was a tremendous vehicle. Mine come from the States. It was brand new and had, well, the guys used to mark, it had a wooden steering wheel even, But the ones that were over there had been reconditioned in Japan, most of them, and restored. But the one I had, it was a nice driving vehicle. I really marveled at how well it could do it. There was no stopping it. You'd have to bottom it out, which we did, would you believe? I mean,
oh, I've seen those things go through mud and all sorts of stuff.
We
Yes.
hauled ammunition that one winter. The battalion was submitted to help, and we went down and picked up ammunition and had them fully loaded in a caravan of them. And actually, we went. Their roads. They only had one good road over there that I ever knew of, and that was between Incheon and Seoul, 16 miles, and it was a little narrow, 2-lane cement highway. Couldn't pass 2 vehicles. Actually, one of them had to get off. Some, especially our big vehicles. I don't know, and but that was the only highway they had. The rest of it was all. And the roads would just go to nothing, I mean, we just bury them trucks. They'd go down that they couldn't get no grasp anymore. They had tank retrievers out there and big units to help us along, get us out, and we'd try to pull each other out with winches. Of course, they had a winch on the front, the deuce-and-a-half, and we could do some maneuvering, But that was pretty trying. I only got involved the one winter. I guess it was the late winter of '51, but it was quite an experience for me.
Yeah.
But
Not just mud, but ice and.
But in retrospect, where we did finally settle in at this stone structure that we found up in the mountainside there for the 8189th, I was able to. They finally got some power down to us. They had a reservoir from the electrical power, tried to get to us. And they got a phase into us, and it was pretty unique. When I tried to connect to it, to try to use some of their power, and supply it, especially to Ken Morioka, that was with the, the VHF equipment in there. He said, he come out to me, and he said, Brownie, he said, we're having a problem. He said, we're only getting like 105 volts and 210. He said our radio equipment would require roughly around 113 or 114 volts to function properly. Of course, here in the States, our voltage in secondary, our houses are 120 volts and 240 volts. So I said, goodness gracious, I didn't realize that. So when I had it hooked to the power unit so I could put the voltage up where it belonged, you know, I had 4 big power units that I normally pulled with. So I got off there and I got one of the transformers that I could get out of the line and get it dead so I could get it apart, pulled it, casing top off of it and got in and looked, it had linkage in there, so forth, and it looked like it had some movement to move. So I thought, it's worth a try. I really didn't know if it would accomplish. I thought it would probably do some differential to it, but I didn't. But it wound up that I almost had to go all the way moving the linkage up to, and I got it up to around 117, 118 volts. And he said, whatever you've done, he said, just leave her there. We're in business. He said, that's great. So that's what I did with the rest of the transformers. But basically of course, the company commander, like I spoke of before, Captain Sullivan, he thought that was really wonderful that us young men had done so well for the battalion there. And we went sailing along pretty good. We were allowed 6 minutes loss of time to, if that was any demerit against us, and we never. One time it was close to that, I got called and one of the winter nights that the normal power from them had gone, and I tried to get out. It was so cold that I only got one of the power units out of the 4 that I got started. They were so from there on, I had the people that worked check things up throughout the night to start the units up through the midnight and warm them up so we didn't get them that they were that dead cold to try to get going.
Yeah. But you were an NCO, a sergeant?
A sergeant first class was called an E6. The company commander, he was very good to us. He said, you young men, he said, like this Morioka, he was the same rank. And we had one more month, if we had stayed in the Army, and that we would receive Master Sergeant. We need one more month to accomplish out the next grade value move. And he actually offered us to go over into Japan and go to some schooling and serve out. I think we'd had to serve another 21 months or more, or better, and move up into an officer's position, you know, and get an officer's rating. But myself and he agreed to that he wanted to return to civilian life. So we thanked him very much for that. That was very nice. But we said, well, except that we were appreciative of what he had done for us and so forth. It'd give us some extra nice earnings, so forth, and that was we kind of left it at that, and then took the discharge.
Yeah, but as a sergeant, were you primarily in that rank because of your technical expertise, or was it also that you were organizing, that you had subordinates working for you? And
yeah, I did have some that worked maintenance and so forth. It was an individual source that the guy that worked as VHF tech, and I worked the power source tech, and it was allowable in the MOS, as they call it in the Army, for us to allowable to have that type of rank. So the captain, he whenever he could make a move for us, he did so, and of course it elevated our pay a little bit too. You know, of course, very good. And we really didn't have anything to spend money on over there. I most times sent most of my earnings home. I would, and the Army give you so much and things of goods, candies, and supplies and all this stuff over and above what you normally would have. And sometimes I just shared that with other guys, or sold some of it even down what they call little black markers. I didn't have no use for it. I didn't want to see it wasted, but I mean that they. I gave it to some of the Koreans, really. I mean, the families that they were very welcome for it, and I saw fit to do so. They were very complimentary to get it too. So,
yeah. And
they would really help us. I mean, I can recall the one time after I was speaking about hauling ammunition. Well, the truck, that new truck was a sight. I mean, it was terrible, mud and dirt, and I took it down to the Han River with it must have been 6, 8 of them. They'd crawled in the back, and they went down, and I pulled down into the portion of the water, and they went over that from top to bottom, had it spotless, cleaned all the dirt and mud off of it, and so forth, brought it back to the battalion. It looked like a new truck.
Yeah.
So.
And I keep looking at your hat, your Korean War veteran hat. Now you've got your ribbons on there. Do you want to quickly comment on what you got in the way of ribbons?
The ribbons basically are for technical involvement and years of service involvement, and basically overall they each have served a portion of involvement with the time that you were in the service. It has respects to some specific things. Some I have to think back what some of them are really related to, but
okay. One relates to Korean War service.
Yeah.
And which is that?
I think it might be the blue in there in the middle, maybe. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But fundamentally, I guess they let those things drift away from me. Really, what they really did respond to. I knew them all, and I had. There's one we have on our old what we had like Ike jacket. We finally had, and we got that because that had just come in at the end of the Second World War. Where
the old
guys
Ike jacket, the short jacket.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And I have the leaf with the that was involving that we did a very prominent service to the Army over there for our communications, and that's the one where the officer came there and had us all out front and met with us and thanked us for our good performance, so forth. So. In that respect, it was well accepted, and the guys really were pleased with that. So.
Yeah. And how long were you in Korea?
Well, basically, I got there, and I want to say the mid to late '51. Mm-hmm. So I went through that winter, which was a really bad winter, and then all of '52, and then I come out in the spring of '53. Terminated my service. When I decided I wasn't going to, re-enlist or stay in the service.
Okay.
So it was really considered to be a 2-year hitch. I mean, that's what you were drafted for. And I proposed to move to what they call ER, or enlisted reserve. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could have been called back, but I thought too, would you believe if I'd have stayed in the Vietnam War, was right behind it, I'd have got.
Yes. One more war.
I might have even got, involved in another session like that, but
yeah,
it wasn't my choosing. But basically, I responded when I was called to do so, and I mean, I'm fortunate. I can rap on wood or something. I got through it all. I mean, it was. Mm-hmm. As I remarked before, quite an experience for a young man, 20-couple years old.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's been really good talking to you. It's really been fascinating hearing about your experiences in supporting the combat there and actually being right up close and personal for a while, clearing minefields and so forth. But the electronics, that would have been fascinating to deal with. And it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
I appreciate it. It's been a treat to be recognized as such.